This is our very ornate little piece of animation to begin the presentation. We just love that little spinning wheel. So Media Ecology Project is, we describe it as a virtuous cycle. It's invested in aiding in the preservation of media history. Most people don't know that historical media are deeply imperiled. So part of it is, just letting people know about that. But we're actually realizing a cycle by which, by virtue of having access to media online through the Magic Box, we can configure new interdisciplinary scholarship about that media. It can be very traditional kind of scholarship, but what we're trying to work on is often conjoined by computational kinds of processes to grow the field in significant ways, but always in a way that adds back to the archives. So we're adding back to the archives, adding value to the archives as we grow the field. And that's kind of the virtuous cycle as described. So this is our website, and we welcome you to visit that, featuring our Semantic Annotation Tool, which is one of our real calling cards. There's an essay in the ArcLight Guidebook to Media History and Digital Humanities that you might check out. In 2019, we put together this lovely graphic, which literally describes the many projects we've been undertaking and the number of archive partners, and it's even expanded since this time, but you can find that on the website as well. So what we're trying to do is realize a sustainability project regarding media history as public memory by developing network scholarship in relationship to this online access, promoting this sense of a very dynamic ecology of historical media, and supporting the essential work of the archives, which, these are people who are typically treading water. There's so much work to do for them to be responsible to the materials that they oversee, and scholars really need to help and play more of a role in that. Instead of just saying, gimme, 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 we want to be more interactive with that process and actually help to support them. So we engage primary research across the disciplines. We explore new research questions. One of our other metaphors for the project is that we're an incubator for new research questions. And we actually love discovering new experimental methods to try to apply on these materials, and therefore innovate new forms of scholarship and publication. So we want to add value to archives and libraries. Scholars and academics can make these materials much more searchable. That's a huge value add. Can make the material searchable across archives, which is a different kind of value add, and even become part of the archival workflow, which is really fantastic kind of goal to have. So the first users, the first best users will be provided access and therefore be in a position to offer advice and advocacy about what to digitize next and why. So literally part of the workflow. And these essential goals of media preservation become augmented via scholarly access. So the original design of MEP is with a tool that came from Columbia University called MediaThread. It's a classroom platform that allowed us to make time-based annotations. So we're working with time-based media. We make annotations that describe the entire entity, but we also make subclip annotations. So from a minute 13 to a minute 25, this is what I see, or this is who's speaking, or this is a historic site, or whatever you have. Put in relationship with this very dynamic digital publishing platform out of the University of Southern California called Scalar, and a tool that we built in response to the founding symposium for MEP. This is my dumb joke. It's a vocabulary tool. It's like taxonomy without the tax. I live in a state that is very excited about having low taxation. So by removing the tax, it actually works better for the state of New Hampshire. Very dumb joke, but it sort of helps you remember what the tool is named, and it actually is meant to create vocabularies. And then between these three things, we can publish new scholarship about the research that we acquire. So as a DH project, we want to be very responsive to the fact that most digital tools are not built for the arts and humanities. We want to absolutely always emphasize collegiality, which is crucial in a DH team. We know that every aspect of this at some point is kind of translation work. If you go into a DH team and you ask them for their definition of ontology, you might get 7 answers. So it's really a good idea to recognize that there will be, you know, little difficulties and to be committed to overcoming them. We're very excited about experimentation and new ways of thinking about, new ways of applying software and other technologies to these tools. Always negotiating comfort zones. I'm going to say that like 3 times because it's so important to doing DH work. And, you know, part of what we do is really different from a lot of standard DH work, which is focused on what I call word culture. You know, we are dealing with sound and image culture, which is a different animal. We are dealing with research methods from film and media studies that want to pay attention to audiences and what they do with texts. And of course, the big one is this dialectic between close reading, which the arts and humanities are always invested in, and reading at scale, which the computational approaches are always invested in. So this is a very functional recognition of that dialectic and the significance, especially for arts and humanities people, to step up to the table and be part of the conversation about new research questions. And we hope to facilitate that as well. So this is an example of what Onomy looks like. It's, you know, sort of a tree structured dictionary that then can be put into relationship with these other tools. We've been very happy about our success in slowly developing a transnational dictionary. And this is grounded in a gift to us from the Film Archive in Taiwan. And they gifted us their one-of-a-kind Chinese and English bilingual dictionary of film terms. And we've been slowly working to expand that into other languages. And then, of course, within other languages, it'll be expanded within those languages as well. But we're very excited about that. Our metadata standards are all very open and still more open. Committed to that as well. So just quickly, this is sort of what MediaThread looks like. It brings an individual film into a sandbox. And from there, you can create time-based annotations. We try to provide an annotation for the entire length of any given text. And we cull from various sources. And, you know, sometimes those sources aren't entirely accurate. So those are always ready to be rewritten in some way. But the annotations, once they are subclips, will go straight to that part of the film. And very, very powerful building block for further analysis. Our semantic annotation tool it was built in relationship to our experience with MediaThread and tries to do additional things, including the capacity for annotations of geometric or geographic parts of the frame, which John will talk about later, and was also built with our colleagues at the University of Maine, the VME lab. So the SAT, the Semantic Annotation Tool, can add annotation to an existing page. It's not very bulky in terms of the lines of JavaScript. You can bring in tags from the external vocabularies from Onomy. So your Onomy dictionary might be very particular to a specific study set. And it's very open to that kind of functionality. Identify the annotations. Everybody gets credit for the work that they do. And the videos, of course, are identified by the URI. We were lucky to get a small grant from the Knight Foundation in 2016 and worked with a colleague here at Dartmouth to demonstrate that some of the power of the SAT was to enable, in this demo, an iterative relationship between manual annotations, what human living, breathing people can do, and what the machines, the machine reading, machine learning algorithms can do. So we had a very small set of texts from the Internet Archive. A colleague and I worked to create manual annotations on those texts of a sufficient number. We gave that information to our colleague in computer science, who had his team work on trying to utilize that as a training set or a quasi-training set for their algorithms. And what we demonstrated was, we could start either way, either with the machine generated or the human generated, and imagine these iterative back and forths to create a kind of a cycle of excellence where the machines get better and better and better at what they do. So we gave that information to their team. They used our keywords to search Google Images for information that could train their neural network. And then they set the neural network onto the same collection of videos and sought out many more time-based annotations than we had produced, and of varying quality, right? So one of the other great applications of the SAT is to help to evaluate what the machines have generated. Excellent, never saw that one. Oh my God, what are you thinking? And by the end of that process, then you have kind of a sweetened training set, and it does afford that kind of iterative potential. So these are some very quick examples. It's a little goofy to see. On the top is the search term. On the lower right is the ground truth, is the manual annotation. And the Google images are on top. And then on the lower left is the search result. And again, the machines this is not a frame grab. This is a clip. It's a time-based annotation that the machine produced. So this one is for a bird. This is one for a map, ground truth, search result. Quilts, this one surprised us a little bit. You love being surprised by the results. This is like a metallic version of the American flag, which is, it's a kind of quilt. So that was, you learn things, which is wonderful. We had a fantastic symposium that Peter participated in 2019, before COVID days. Those days. That was very successful. Brought a lot of people to the table to talk about different kinds of tools for moving image analysis. And this was actually a kind of a celebration of the fact that we had recently received 2 quite sizable grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities to build and improve on the SAT tool regarding really famous media history collections. So one is about very early cinema. It's primarily based on American cinema for obvious reasons, proximity and rights and so forth. But we do have some interesting additions to that project. So this is this will give me an example. One of the things that we focused on, like an available research question, has to do with performance styles, which changed dramatically in the first 20 years of cinema, going from a theatrical style that was principally based on posture and gesture and not so much on the face, because they wanted to express meaning to the back row of the theater. And that really becomes transfigured in relationship to the proximity of the camera. So we're working on, is this guy gonna play? Yeah. We're working on a number of actresses in this early period. This gives you an example of someone who's really in between those phases, obviously very stagey in some ways, and in other ways in a capacity to use her face and to, her name is Florence Lawrence. She was the first American movie star for reasons that some of you know, and I won't get into right now. But we're actually using a lot of different ways to think about these performance analyses. So one is the application of Laban movement analysis, which is incredibly granular, is often applied to 1 or 2 second clips at a time. Pardon me, and Professor Ojulan Kolaski is really the pioneer of this kind of work. And a lot of students are helping with that. You can imagine it's kind of time consuming and very cool. During that digital tool symposium, we were introduced to Open Pose, and our good colleague Peter has been really helpful in trying to get Open Pose to maybe work on these early silent films, and we're surprised that it worked at all. And you'll see that it's kind of herky-jerky, but so promising. and Peter, I guarantee we've got some much better contemporary, even restored prints of things that we're going to be sending your way. We're also working with got some advice from some folks in the industry to check out this software package called Nuke. And what Nuke allows us to do that we can't really do with these other tools, you can zone in on Florence Lawrence's face, and then it will follow her face throughout a shot and give you all those different expressions, which themselves are valuable in terms of these analysis, but then also provide some metadata for when and where she appears in the frame. So ultimately, this will become a compendium that will be published in Scalar and will conjoin a lot of very detailed metadata that describes the history of these studios with the metadata that's taken from these tools, and maybe some better looking than this machine reading kind of metadata into a new resource for early cinema scholars. Our second grant has to do with a fantastic dream project of mine. I know that there's a lot of footage of the American Civil Rights movement in local archives, and these materials have never been placed into relationship to one another. So that's what we're doing, and we're facilitating, again, new forms of analysis across these archives. So engaging scholars to create this brand new kind of resource of collected television civil rights news film. The extra deliverable on this, again, is with a collaboration with the VMI Lab, who are experts in designs for what accessibility often means in these kinds of projects, which is access for low vision and blind users. So that's a lot going on with that project, and we're extremely excited about it. We have a new pilot that is gaining some steam regarding what I call the Film Studio None of Us Know, which is the collection of the U.S. Information Agency at the National Archive. During the Cold War, they produced 20,000 or more films, which is a lot of films, but they could not be seen within the U.S. They were films of information and persuasion. Now they can be seen. The National Archives is digitizing them like crazy. And when I had this initial conversation, I said, can we especially try to focus on scholars outside the US for whom these might be very well-known films? And our first such exercise in that is coming up next week. And we invite you to tune in to a conference that is co-sponsored by a university in South Korea, and is really going to be an amazing, distinctive new set of scholarship that brings this kind of dialogic attention to these materials. I think I'm running out of time, so I'll let you see this slide on your own, but you see some of our research goals is to really think about the local of these communities and better articulate very complex dynamics of political hegemony across the Cold War era. So in general, I think of the project as pursuing what I call fugitive histories that afford kind of counter memories and even a sense of a Nietzschean untimely, oftentimes working with archival content that hasn't even ever been remembered, let alone forgotten. And creates for these, but really work tools.
Does it just hang for me? I don't.
Yeah, no. I think it's happening for everyone. I think we
Yeah,
might need
Mark
to repeat. Ask Mark to repeat the last.
Yeah,
you froze? Yeah.
Okay.
Am I still frozen?
At the moment,
You seem to be back now.
Okay, okay, great. Yeah, so this notion of fugitive history is kind of a gloss over many of our projects where we're looking at materials that really haven't even been in a position to be remembered, let alone forgotten. And this really interesting capacity for a kind of post-ephemeral new valence. So thinking about this notion of chronotopes from Bakhtin, and really, I think at odds with what we know to be true of a lot of contemporary culture, which is all about the acceleration of time, and create this other kind of relationship to the past with a new capacity for access, and that these digital tools can really be crucial to helping to read and develop these kind of dialectics of reading. So I'm very much influenced by Bernard Stiegler, who just passed away last year, and whose emphasis in his work really changed in his relationship to the arts, and who wants to, he trained with Derrida, and I don't want to spend too much time on Derrida, but Stiegler brings this notion of the pharmacon from Derrida to historical materials, and maybe especially to historical materials being treated within contemporary tech environments. And really wants us to re-enchant our sense of the historical world. And I think that these tools are incredibly powerful in their capacity to do this, but by remembering this kind of pharmacon duality. We all know of the dangers of some of these machine reading tools and some of the inaccuracies and some of the bigotries and so forth. At the same time, we know that these tools can be very powerful in doing this historical work. So creating a sense of ethics about these dualities within the contemporary tech world, I think is very much part of our responsibility. So even if you think about, I imagine this was a big meme in the EU this week as well, the deep nostalgia kind of thing. Very powerful. It is a kind of a re-enchantment of the historical past. At the same time, you know, people like officials at the Holocaust Museum were, you know, very justly concerned about the capacity, the enhanced capacity for deep fakes and what people might actually be very willingly attempting to do with such technologies. So we want to advocate for archival digitalization, online access, work, if possible, to develop scholarly secure tiers of access. We're kind of scholar first, and then if things snowball into public access, that's great. But I think the scholar first approach makes a great deal of sense. Raise awareness about the endangered status of media history, work on new pedagogy about producing metadata that can be given back to archives, engage in this really important dialectic between close and distant reading and new approaches that might enable and grow crowdsourcing. So I will now hand off to John.
Thank you very much. And let me share my screen from the point you left off. You should have now. So thanks. And I'm going to pick that discussion up from sort of the technological point of view in terms of asking how we go about building all of these sorts of arguments based on top of technology. So I don't think that I need to go into a whole lot of depth in terms of explaining why and how the modalities of technological infrastructure end up influencing how ideas get formed and shared in academia. I think that that is fairly established at this point, but that's the basis for our doing tech development of our own. If we want to look at these materials using different conceptual frameworks, then we can't just depend on the existing off-the-shelf technology, at least not always. So as Mark mentioned, we started with a sort of off-the-shelf for us at least, platform media thread, and found that that wasn't necessarily working for what we wanted for the kinds of analyses and arguments we want to make. And so we created this semantic annotation tool a few years ago, and are in the process of updating it now. The semantic annotation tool was meant to get at that infrastructure layer that allows people to take it and then go do what they want to do with it. So not necessarily a completely standalone sort of system. It was meant to be dropped into other people's websites, other people's software and infrastructure and workflows, apologies. And in general, to just enable a more granular form of human annotation. The annotation tool was originally made in two pieces, Waldorf and Statler, as represented by the Muppets who always stood up in the balcony and yelled at the people on stage. Waldorf is the front end. It's a JavaScript plugin that you can just drop into any page that has an embedded video tag, and it will wrap the annotation interface around it. Statler is the backend. So whenever you make these annotations, you have to save them somewhere because you're working on a web page and you don't have an inherent place to keep them. Statler was kind of a server in the sky where all of these annotations could live and be shared. I say was there because we have voted Statler off the island. If I can get slides to advance, there we go. Statler was useful. It was standalone though, and it was another piece of infrastructure for people to set up and maintain. And we're working with humanists who really just want to read the text. They don't want to worry about the tech as much. So what we did in the new version of the annotation tool is we're integrating the Statler server, the functionality of keeping and syndicating annotations into Scalar itself. So now we're going to have a Waldorf plugin that can either be integrated into Scalar or can be standalone and still fulfill that function of being able to drop into your own projects. But when it saves annotations, it's just going to go off to Scalar. So what the annotation tool isn't, it isn't meant to be the end-all and be-all for managing video clips in a research context. In fact, we don't, in the annotation tool, keep any metadata about the video clips themselves beyond the URL of the file and, title maybe. What we do is we have all of that stored elsewhere. In our case, we tend to organize it in Airtable with the help of some excellent NYU grad students who have been working on this with us, just to give us an understanding of what materials we have, what kinds of data we know about them, and then we'll be able to tie those into the annotations later on. But when I say annotations, what am I talking about? Well, Mark kind of previewed this, but to just get really granular specific with it, media level commentary, so a description field, essentially, an open text description. Time and geometry based annotations, so you can define annotation as a target that focuses on a specific time clip, but also a set of coordinates in the clip itself. These are, unlike a lot of annotation systems that implement geometric tags, they are not necessarily just rectangles. You're able to choose whatever vertices you want and define your own polygon. And that's really useful for things like gesture analysis, where you're trying to, for instance, outline a hand, which Zoom is not very good at, it turns out. A set of tags that are associated with them, and also just a little bit of provenance information about who is the one doing the annotation, who created the annotations, because that's really useful for academic purposes, obviously. These annotations don't just need to exist in our annotation toolset, though, and in fact, they're most useful when they can be shared. So one of the things that we've been working with is a group that's being led by Claria to make these different types of tools that work with video annotations interoperable. We're still hoping that we can share data across Elan and FrameTrail and Claria's tool and Waldorf, and we're hoping, at least, there's a few technical glitches that we're working on, but we're hoping to make this all work in IIIF's framework so that we can then get access to an even greater suite of tools that use that as a sort of shell for containing all of the annotations. How do we end up using this? Again, Mark mentioned a few things, but just to run through them, the gesture analysis use case that he mentioned, trying to create searchable segmentation. So if you just want to, in this case, identify the different segments that made up this sort of variety show that aired in the United States, you can define those times. Trying to create concept networks. So once you tag an individual clip, you can see how one clip relates to another. In this case, we were looking at the creators and technical crew that were behind the paper print files that Mark mentioned and seeing how they related to one another. You can do straight up transcription with it. So this was a case where we applied the annotation tool to a Chinese animated film that's used to teach language in Dartmouth's language department. I turned off the audio for it, but what's going on here is that the Chinese characters on the left that are being highlighted in red are synced up with a voiceover in the animation. And you can do nice things with this that you can't do with traditional set of on-screen annotations, in that we actually have a button that allows you to switch on the fly between character sets. So Chinese uses both a traditional and a simplified character set. We can, on the fly, switch between them and no synchronization problems or anything like that. This is kind of an interesting application, the annotation tool, because it's very much outside of the sort of use cases that we were talking about initially when we created it, but it illustrates how reusable something like this is when you build it in a very generalized sort of way. And then there's also the auto classification use case that Mark mentioned. We were experimenting with some Google image results to sort of auto train a neural network. Basically, what this project did is it used a little bit of ground truth from humans and then mixed it with a whole lot of questionable ground truth, I guess we'll say, that came from Google, and try to automatically identify what was going on in these scenes using a much broader vocabulary than you might have with a typical auto classification system. The next step in that is working with those tools to try to not just independently have all of these separate use cases, but to bring them together and have them inform one another. So I want to go a little bit in depth on this one project where we were working with the distant viewing toolkit that Taylor Arnold and Lauren Tilton created. This is a machine vision, or yeah, we'll go with machine vision. It's a deep learning system that's based on various analytics that I'll just stick with machine vision. It's easier that way. So this is a machine vision system that is used to identify individual faces and scene transitions and things like that in video. We were using it as one step in the auto classification process that I talked about, where we were using it to split scenes essentially. We were applying it to this Signal Corps material, which is a set of films that the US Signal Corps created. These are typical of many of the films that we work with, in that they are older and not necessarily in great condition. They're not the sort of digital video files that you would expect nowadays. And so most of the tools that we have to automatically work with them are going to have some trouble with it, because that's just how most of these machine vision tools end up working. They're dependent upon high quality, high resolution, and stable film, stable cameras, things like that. We also have some information about talks about their creation process. We have some PDFs that have been transcribed that are the actual scene logs describing each individual segment within them. And what we did in this project, we tried to pull all of those things together using the annotation tool as a medium. So pulling from CSVs and one modality of just manual entry, pulling from data frames that were automatically created by Python in the distant viewing toolkit, and pulling from another set of manual annotations, but this time coming from a web application and JSON data, and seeing what it looks like when you put them all next to each other. This is not necessarily trivial because the data doesn't line up that well. We had to do a little bit of adjustment there. But what we end up with is essentially this set of annotations that are able to be shown next to one another and therefore put into context. In this case, the green is from the descriptions, the blue is the shot log, and the red is the machine-generated cut from DVT. Now, this doesn't mean it's perfect. As mentioned, because of the quality of the film, a lot of the automatic tools don't work really great with it. And so we end up with things like the column on the right where DVT is detecting a shot change every few seconds, even though that is not a real shot change. Those are the kinds of things that we want to be able to identify and then feed back into DVT to improve the tool in the long run, but B, still provide a nice framework for us to hand off to humans to fill in the blanks around the annotations. So in this example, if we look at it and know that from 8:59 to 9:10 is actually a single cut, then we can just merge all of those together, and that is a container that a human can go in and provide a description for later on. So that's kind of where we are. What is coming up next with the annotation tool? Well, we're working with moving images, so it's really nice to be able to have moving annotations that go with them. The previous version of the annotation tool, when you created one of those geometric targets, it was static throughout the entire time span of the annotation target. We can now move them. This video is probably not super exciting for you because it's just one rectangle sliding along. It's extremely exciting for me because it took a lot of work to make that actually happen in a way that can be presented on a web page without interfering with lots of other technology that is shown on the page. So I'm really happy that we're just to that point and we can actually have multiple annotations running around simultaneously and do all kinds of other fun stuff. We can feed that into the next generation of other tools as well. So using that same model as a DVT, we can pull data from things like Nuke and create a better spatialized set of annotation targets. And then we can also syndicate the data better now. I talked about the annotation collaboration among different tools. We can also do the same with the vocabularies that we're working with. So with onomy.org, the new version of that has been created as part of these two grants that Mark described. Now, not only can you create hierarchical vocabularies, but you can have terms reference outside authority files or outside vocabularies that are shared by the larger world. You can put them in, different languages in for both the definitions and for the terms themselves, so we can work with this in a multilingual way. It's basically just trying to create a more open field for work here. And that allows you to do fun stuff like identify scenes automatically and see where the tags line up with one another to try to create these ideas of automatic connections within the files that can be supplemented by all of the humans that are annotating using our tool. So I'll finish up there and open up for questions.